Everybody, my name is Thomas Bragdon, and today I bring you my video for computer science ethics class. And I want to discuss the topic of CRISPR, and I want to talk a little bit about what exactly is CRISPR, how it relates to computer science, the benefits, the ethical issues surrounding it. So what is CRISPR? It stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. And these are just DNA sequences of prokaryotic organisms, which are bacteria and under the domain of archaea. And these bacteria, what they do is they have an enzyme called Cas. And there's actually a bunch of different types of Cas proteins. The one specifically that I want to talk about is Cas9, and that's the one that's mostly used by scientists. But scientists use these in many different ways. And for bacteria, these enzymes are used to defend against invading viruses. And in essence, these enzymes play the same function as our immune system does in protecting us from harmful invaders. This enzyme allows for bacteria to target a viral invader's DNA, and once it targets and infiltrates that DNA, it degrades the nucleic acids that it is composed of. So what scientists have done is that they have modified this process using CRISPR in combination with the Cas enzyme. And they developed a way of using CRISPR sequences with what is called an RNA-guided Cas9 to recognize and do one of two things to specific strands to DNA. It can go in and disable a gene, sort of like turning on and turning off a light switch. We can turn on and turn off genes, and that can be very beneficial. Or they can use this protein to go in and make precise changes to the DNA, and you could think of it as cutting. And basically they'll go in and cut a strand of DNA, and they can either cut it completely out and leave it as is, or they can use it to fix a faulty gene that has a harmful mutation. And this is ultimately what we call genome editing. So what does computer science have to do with CRISPR? Well, as you know, as the technology advances, we create complex and different possibilities through this technology. And as we do that, it allows for deeper understanding of other disciplines. In this case, that would be biology. But you can think as this technology increases, we further our understanding of astronomy, physics, any type of discipline that you could think of. As we increase our technology and complexity and what it can do, we learn more in other subjects. It's not just software. That software is just one part of it. And what does CRISPR specifically have to do with computer science? Well, like I said, it goes hand in hand. Some specific things that it had to do with it is that there's some researchers from Microsoft and MIT that came together to use machine learning that would predict which part of a gene to target when scientists wanted to modify that gene. And that doesn't sound like a big deal. And they also created a database on these genes and what happens when you target a specific gene and what happens when you make a change, such as turning on or off or adding in nucleic acids, whether that be adenine, thymine, guanine, or cytosine. And that's ultimately what DNA is composed of. But these computer scientists, they've effectively made this CRISPR more effective by doing this. They created the database and they created this machine learning technology, and like I said, it works hand in hand, and it just makes it a more effective thing. They've created this database on DNA mutations and genes specifically on what scientists can go into, and they can look and say, oh, well, let's just look up this gene and see what happens when we turn it on, turn it off, or modify it. And this also allows for them to make very precise changes. And the good thing about that is they know what exactly happens when they make this change, instead of kind of the check and guessing game that they would be using without the help of this development of the software that goes with it. They've also used CRISPR, I won't go too much into it, but to think about incorporating biocomputers into people, into their cells, and using the cells as like logic gates, and they bounce back and forth through communicating with each other. And the collaboration between not only computer science discipline and other disciplines is that these two teams, it's just another step forward into optimizing this technology. And without the field of computer science, we wouldn't have CRISPR. So it goes hand in hand, and it will stay that way for all disciplines, on all technology and different disciplines. So there's some ethical issues surrounding CRISPR, and I'll go over it very briefly. There's a safety issue, but with that being said, there's safety issues with any new type of technology that is being developed today. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be used for bad things, and that is to say, the bad things could come out of just using it for a beneficial cause, or it could come from some evil purpose. And that, like I said, that comes from all new technology. And the main reason that scientists are worried about this one is that we could create a what you would call a super disease that couldn't be contained, and that's a sound issue, and I'll address that later. Another one is germline editing, and what that means is that we are editing on embryos, and it kind of goes in regards to the abortion issue, and it's not nearly the same, because it doesn't fall within aborting a versus life versus is it alive or is it not. It's more in that we are going into these embryos and we are modifying their genes before they're born. The issue is, who is it for us to say that we should modify them? Because once they're born, that's the ones that are going to be living with the consequences or the benefits of what we're doing to them in the embryonic stage. Another issue, it kind of lines up with germline editing, is therapeutic versus enhancement. Well, as you know, if we can modify genes, then we can modify them not only for therapeutic purposes, which it would be treating diseases and anything negative that can come, but enhancement can be a big issue. And a lot of arguments against that are designer babies would be my first point to bring up about that, and that's also ties in with the equity and justice section. And the argument there is that once we advance this technology further, the capabilities are limitless, and eventually they believe that you can use it as enhancement purposes for children, for your future children per se. And what they do is they allow these people to go in and pick the traits of their children. You don't want freckles? Well, let's turn that gene off for freckles. You want them to have blonde hair, blue eyes? Let's turn those genes on. Let's modify this embryo to make a perfect specimen per se. And like I said, this brings it into the equity, and they're worried about dividing social classes, because with enhancement treatments, I would almost compare it to plastic surgery. You know, these aren't covered by insurance, so only the wealthy would be able to afford it. And they are fear that this would further divide social classes, which I can see, because these lower income people that don't have the financial back to afford treatments like this, they would just keep producing as normal, whereas you have the higher social classes that keep producing the offspring of, you want them to be muscular, want them to be very smart, they can do that. And then obviously the last one would be religion. A lot of issue regarding religion that mainly states, who are we to play God? Who are we to modify that of what he has created? And those cover the main issues surrounding CRISPR. Now, the benefits of CRISPR are plentiful, and I can't even begin to cover all of them, because they're limitless. As we further develop this technology, we could be used for anything. The first one I want to discuss is, the reason I really wanted to cover this topic is genetic diseases. And why I wanted to cover this is because my son, he actually has a genetic disease. It's called cystic fibrosis, and I won't go into exactly what it is. And it's a chronic illness that these millions of people have to suffer with, and cystic fibrosis just being one of those. And their day-to-day quality of life is pretty poor for most cases. And sometimes on the outside you can't tell it, but on the inside these people are suffering, whether that be mentally or physically. And as of now, the treatment for genetic diseases, there's no cure. The only cure that we have is to treat the symptoms and manage it to the best we can to improve the person's quality of life. And to me, that's just not enough. And this brings me to the point, this offers a cure. This could eliminate suffering from millions. Another thing that it could do, eliminate microbes. And what I mean by microbes is viruses per se. And I'll bring up cancer. It's not technically a virus, but the first microbe I want to talk about, the virus that it could help eliminate, would be HIV/AIDS. And that's been a killer forever without any really progressing cure towards it. But scientists do believe that CRISPR could offer a cure in the form of two senses. They could go in and they could modify a gene, and what they think, they could modify a gene that they've seen that makes mice resistant to HIV, and they could do that same thing for human, and they could implement this gene and replicate it in humans, ultimately making them resistant to HIV. Or they could simply modify the gene to make the cure. And that, like I said, that cures millions of people. And then, like I mentioned earlier, cancer. The thing with cancer is, it's not, in some sorts, there's different types of cancer. In some cancers, they have made significant improvement, but for the vast majority, cancer is not a very good prognosis. And the thing about it is that our body comes equipped with the defense system to defeat cancer in the sense of our immune system. It has the tools, but with cancer, it's a different story. The only issue with cancer is cancer, as you know, it's just an abnormal growth rate of cells, and it just spreads, and they become tumors, and it spreads and spreads and spreads, and then eventually it shuts down organ systems. And the problem is that these abnormal cells, is that our immune system cannot detect it. So they basically hide themselves and disguise themselves as a healthy cell, so our immune system just kind of bypasses it. Well, with CRISPR, what they think they can do is basically modify our immune system cells, specifically T cells, and make them like bloodhounds per se, and make them be able to recognize cancer cells and destroy them at the root, making us be able to use our immune system efficiently to destroy cancer instead of having to go through chemotherapy, which is horrible on the body. Whereas this, you're using a natural system, and there shouldn't be too many negative consequences of it. And ultimately, that could cure. It could be a cure. It will take a while, but this is a possible cure. And as you know, this has been a killer of millions and billions of people for years and years and years. Resurrection. Now it's not as you think. We're not going to bring back people. We're not going to bring back anything. But it has to do with extinction of species that are around now and extinct things that haven't been gone for too long. Now, dinosaurs, they're out of the question. There's no DNA to bring those guys back, or animals to relate to them to combine their DNA with anything else. An example I'll give with saving species, or not technically saving species, but bringing back like a hybrid of that species, would be what they could do with a Asian elephant and the DNA harvested from a woolly mammoth, because they have access to that. They could do this. They could go in and they could modify DNA inside the embryo of a Asian elephant, and they could implant the DNA from the woolly mammoth and combine the two. And that's not going to bring back the woolly mammoth, but what it will do is it would ultimately create a hybrid of the two, and you would see aspects of both. You would see a large mammal that has thick fur and can withstand cold temperatures. So ultimately it would bring back a woolly mammoth in that sense, but it won't be the exact same creature. But I thought that was pretty neat. The next one would be agricultural. in agricultural, what they can do is it's the same as modifying any living organism. Agriculture crops, um, they have DNA inside them, and what this could do, this could benefit us by creating foods that have a longer shelf life, that taste better, that yield more. And the it's limitless at what we could do with our agriculture, and that could solve many problems. And last one, they could eliminate diseases from pests. And a big one I'll touch on would be like malaria, for example. They could ultimately, there's two approaches to this from scientists' perspective. They could eliminate the pest completely, as of the mosquito, and they could modify mosquitoes' genes and make the mosquito have flight impaired and vision impaired, and ultimately this would flow into what is called gene flow, and it would go into the gene pool, and eventually all mosquitoes would eventually have impaired wings and vision, so impaired flight and vision, and this ultimately would end to the mosquito. And another thing they could do, they could modify the mosquito's genes to not be able to carry the disease and pass it on to humans and other types of animals, which I think is the more appropriate approach, because who knows, what if we do get rid of mosquitoes? There'll be a negative consequence. So we'll go on to my thoughts on the situation, and I want to approach this ethical issues of each one of them, and I want to discuss the benefits of it. So, like I was talking about the safety of issue is that we create a disease or some sort of deadly new virus that can wipe out the humans and all life. And my contrast and opinion on that is that, one, that is currently happening, as you see more diseases that we don't know how to deal with come up every day. The diseases are evolving, they're becoming resistant to antibiotics. Example would be the flu. Every year there's a new flu virus. It's a new type of it. It evolves. And we kind of just guess with the vaccines, and sometimes we hope and pray that that vaccine works. And then sometimes it doesn't. You can see epidemics of the flu cases, and it kills many people. And same thing that, like on the news, the coronavirus, you see that. My argument would be, yes, it could create something potentially deadly, but in the same sense, if we're developing this technology where we can modify our genes to be resistant to HIV and other types of diseases, we could just modify people's genes in that sense to make them resistant to these ones that could be created. And then we could make ourselves resistant to the ones that are already there, which are HIV, and you have cancer, you have the flu, and all these other diseases that are causing multiple deaths per year. That also comes to the point, it's just an overall, in my stance, it's just the overall benefit to the quality of life, and it brings happiness to the, I would say it's almost affects 100% of the population in the world, because when you talk about these diseases, these genetic diseases, cystic fibrosis, for example, I'll tell you a little bit about my son, what he goes through daily. He goes through treatments daily. And he, for the first part of his life, for me and my extended family, he had been in the hospital more times than us combined. And he's got a GI tube. He has to do daily treatments, which consist of nebs, where he has to take in some saline solution and another type of treatment. And then he has to take pills that help his digestion. And he has to do a vest, which shakes him and helps break up the mucus out of his system. And there's just all sorts of illnesses that go along with this, and it's just chronic and it's daily, and all they can do is simply just treat and manage it to improve his quality of life. And like I said, the prognosis on this is for some of these is just terrible. And for that, to me, to hear that a CRISPR could provide a cure is enough for me to say, yeah, let's push this forward. And that's not just my stance on just because my son has cystic fibrosis. That's for everybody that deals with cancer, that deals with any disease that suffers chronically, that anything that could therapeutically benefit them and cure them ultimately and eliminate the majority of deadly diseases that we have now. And that kind of brings me to the enhancement purposes. Yeah, it could get to that point, but the enhancement purposes, if people want to do that, then that's fine, because it just brings so much joy to people around the world to know that they could be possibly cured of incurable diseases that were thought of before, and it'll save millions of lives. And my opinion is, it's ridiculous. I mean, if they do want to do enhancement purposes, and that could be regulated by the government, that it should not be used for these purposes and only be used for therapeutic purposes, that could be regulated. So I don't even think that would be a valid argument. And that kind of just takes into the justice and equity issue, that if we're not allowing this for enhancement purposes and we allow this technology to be widely accessible to everybody, then that just eliminates that. And as for religion, in my opinion, and this goes for most religions, if from a standpoint that believes in a God and that believes that God does a good thing and he wants good for all the people, then I believe that if you believe in that sort of thing, then you should believe that the God put these intelligent people on this planet to come up with this type of technology that'll save millions of lives and provide a happiness. And that in turn kind of eliminates that ethical issue. And I'm sure there's more regarding religion. That's just my take on it. And as for more benefits that just outweigh these issues, agricultural would be a huge one, in that we can create crops that shelf life lasts for a very long time. We can make crops that are bigger and they yield more. And what that does is, as you know, we have a crisis in starvation around the world. Millions of people are starving. Well, with CRISPR, we could modify food to increase the yield. When you get more food, we can provide that to more people. It becomes cheaper. And overall, it could solve that potential issue of starvation. Maybe not completely eliminate it, but it could solve a big portion of it. And those are just my thoughts on it in general. And for me, all of these benefits, and I've missed a lot because this technology is just in its early infancy, is that it's limitless and the benefits far outweigh the negative consequences. And to me, that's just gives me a full go at, yes, I think we should be backing this technology. I don't think there should be any limits on it. Maybe enhancement purposes should be withheld, but until we get the therapeutic benefits down, we won't have to worry about that, because that's in the far future. So ultimately, yes, I give this a go, and I don't believe the ethical issues surrounding it are enough to just push it to the wayside, because this is something that is revolutionary and will be something that will impact everybody's lives in the future.